And as the frumpy pink orc drew its last breath, having severed the thumb of its biggest foe, the platypus bear, it said 3 words. I eat oranges.
And so, children, the moral of the story is, do not go out under the light of a waning full moon on the second Tuesday of the month, ending in Y, with pickles.
That was a Golden Phoenix burp, just so y'all
That's right.
are informed.
Hey there, nomads of lore. I'm Sean.
And I'm Jonathan.
And we are Mead and Mischief, your home away from no home. Today, we are going to be talking about a subgenre of fantasy. We're going to be talking about fables and fairy tales, which are not strictly the same thing, which is why we're separating them, but they share enough elements that we're going to talk about them at the same time. So, first of all, what is a fairy tale?
So a fairy tale is a story typically told towards children, that includes magical elements and or mythical creatures. Lord,
magical element.
Bring, bring.
Technology, which element we don't understand, is often conveyed as magic or whatever that Asimov.
Oh,
right? Was it Asimov?
Put it there. Just so we can learn with you too.
Absolutely, yeah. So we'll be learning along with you on some. We have more knowledge on some and less on others, but we're gonna dive into it with you. Yep. These are typically very academic, and there are subgenres upon subgenres, and we're not gonna go super. We're gonna keep these fairly brief and kind of give you an overview with some examples. So today we're gonna talk about fables and fairy tales. So what's a fairy tale?
All right, so a fairy tale is a story typically aimed at children, but not always.
That we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, that's right. That includes magical elements and possibly mythical creatures.
Okay, so contrasting and comparing and all the things, fables. A fable is also often intended for children. So there's a similarity. We could set up a little Venn diagram. Or not. And we'll have to pay our editor more.
That's right.
But anyway.
Or anything.
Yeah, right. We're getting there. Anyway, so a fable is a story, often a short story. They're typically not very long. And they often have anthropomorphic animals, fanciful talking animals, right? And they pretty much always have a moral or a message that's embedded in them.
So again, the key differences between those two are that a fable has a moral, where a fairy tale does not, and a fable also does not have to have mythical creatures or magical elements in it. It could just be a moral telling story. So, you might ask, what are some examples, Sean, of some classic fairy tales?
So, really, fairy tales and that whole genre started in the way back. And it started really with oral tradition of people in their homes telling stories and around the campfires telling stories, and some of them evolved from mythologies and some of those stories. Exactly. Some of those myths and legends, Norse mythology and all these other things. So they evolved from some of those, and often were parents kind of telling stories of these things that happened to scare their children into behaving, and sometimes just for entertainment. And so some of the earliest and most famous fairy tales out there, of course, those of the Grimm's brothers. And the Grimm's brothers, they were German brothers in reality, And they kind of went around all over the place and just collected all of these fairy tales. A lot of the things that we know and love, things like Cinderella, for example, and things like Little Red Riding Hood, and things like Snow White. All of those were originally Grimm's fairy tales. Now it's worth noting those, you've heard all of those, right? If you've been not living under a rock, Disney is a thing. It's kind of, we got our, at this point, we kind of got our big-eared overlords, at least media overlords. They're liable to run everything, but that's a different conversation for a different day. But anyway, they've retold, Walt himself started this retelling of classic fairy tales. It's worth noting, though, and at this point most people know this, but for completeness sake, that when Walt retold these, he cleaned them up a lot and made these nice, pretty, feisty, happy, light-hearted things. Whereas a lot of the original fairy tales have much darker elements. Like, for example, in Cinderella, this is a lot of people know about this one, but in Cinderella, that scene where the stepsisters are basically trying to steal the marrying the prince from Cinderella, and trying to try on the slippers. Of course, in the film, they're just jamming them on, and it's very comedic, and the slipper goes and smacks the guy in the face and all that stuff. But in the original telling, the sisters actually cut their toes off to make them fit, and so there's all kinds of darker elements. So Grimm's fairy tales are probably the most classic and well-known examples of classic fairy tales.
So Grimm's brothers were they retold a lot of fairy tales. They took them and compiled them into books. Didn't so much write very many, if any. Not sure, but on the flip side, Hans Christian Andersen is a Dutch author, Dutch children's author, who retold several like Grimm's brothers, but also wrote his own. One big one is the Little Mermaid. Also had very dark elements. Was not a happy-go-lucky ending.
It was very melancholy.
Yes, yeah. Also, the Ugly Duckling and the Snow Queen, which recently there were some movies.
Frozen is loosely, but very loosely based on.
Wasn't there a Snow Queen movie as well? That came
maybe
out in the last, a live action.
You could be. True. That's probably also loosely based.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. So there you go. That's some good classical versions of fairy tales. And now let's do some fables.
Absolutely. Like we said at the beginning, fables always have a moral or a message. Always. That's really what separates them and makes them their own unique thing, apart from just fairy tales. And so we're starting with classic, of course. The name Aesop is synonymous with classical fables. And he wrote all kinds, and they're all these wild things. No,
Wild things.
That's not what I meant to say at all. This wide array of different messages and meanings, kind of a fantastical proverbs almost. And so a couple of examples of Aesop's fables would be The Ant and the Grasshopper. That one, of course, has been retold bunches of times. We've seen it in Disney and DreamWorks and Pixar, and all have variations on that. And that one, the moral, is hard work, and it pays off. I don't remember the exact wording from the fable, the original. Of course, the original is in German or something. I can't remember what nationality he was. Something. But anyway, so that one is very well known. Another fairly well known fable was The Goose Who Laid the Golden Egg, right? And so you've probably heard of that one before. That fable actually, we were talking earlier about classic fairy tales being dark. That fable is kind of dark if you're an animal lover, because the guy he finds this goose that lays golden eggs, and he begins to getting rich, and he begins to covet after these eggs, and he doesn't want anybody else, and so he ends up killing the goose, and then he loses all his money or something horrible, and the moral, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's something to do with greed doesn't prosper or pay off, or something along those lines. So Aesop's fables are, of course, the epitome of classic fables.
So a more modern, and we could talk about how modern this take is, a more modern take on fables. We can talk about two. So George Orwell, and we are going to use him again in another video, but he did a fable known as Animal Farm. And it's got some fable elements, some allegory, some whimsical elements, satire, to it. And the moral is all animals are created equal, but some are more equal than others.
Amoral is probably more than one, but that's
one of the morals in it. Yes, and of course, again, modern George Orwell is fairly old, but he's not as old as Aesop, so that's why we put him in this group for this video. Another video we'll be talking about his book 1984, and he will be in the classic of that. So anyway, little sneak peek.
Come at us, bro.
That's right. So another good modern take on fables is a show called VeggieTales. This is a Christian cartoon with anthropomorphic vegetables that talk. And so they have lots of different stories. One of which we pulled from is just God is bigger than the boogeyman. So moral. It would be the moral. So anyway, so those are some good takes on modern fables. Now let's look at modern fairy tales.
Modern fairy tales are, as you might expect from modern literature, often kind of tweaking of the way we think of fairy tales. And so we wanted to kind of there's all different ways. You could probably at this point you could probably put a bunch of subgenres of modern fairy tales. We could split hairs, and I'm sure there are academic papers out there written on all this stuff. But
Our point is to be concise.
Absolutely. Right? And so, without further ado, let's quit rambling on. Thanks. So we're going to kind of highlight three kind of categories of modern fairy tales with an example for each. So the first idea is basically following the classic fairy tale formula, and which we're not even really going to go into what the classic fairy tale formula is, but things that kind of follow the traditional motifs and beats of a fairy tale, but in a modern setting with some modern things. A great example of that is Edward Scissorhands. Great film. I can't think of who directed it, but it's a great Johnny Depp film. Winona Ryder when he's a lot younger. Actually, a good Johnny Depp performance. It's a beautifully shot, beautifully imagined. It's not ding-a-ling.
I put it on vibrate. Why is it doing that?
I don't know.
Sorry. A good Johnny Depp film.
Yeah, it is it's a good Johnny Depp film. We like to give content where there is some intense moments. It wouldn't be very good in my opinion for young kids, but go to if you're concerned, look at reviews you trust. But it's a great follows the formula modern fairy tale. Second category we want to talk about is what we're going to call reimaginings, where it takes classic fairy tales and remakes them for a modern setting. Of course, it can be argued that all the Disney films would fall into that category, really. But we wanted to highlight specifically a Neil Gaiman short novella. I think is probably what it would be categorized. The Sleeper and the Spindle. Neil Gaiman is one of my favorite fantasy authors. He often has fairy tale-like elements. Probably the best example is The Sleeper and the Spindle. In that book, novella, whatever, he combines Snow White and Sleeping Beauty into one story, and it's just beautifully written. With it's very, very interesting. It's very fun. It's very Neil Gaiman style writing. You should check it out for sure. The last one is the last modern fairy tale formula, if you will, that we want to illustrate is fairy tales that are directed directly at adults. And we're not talking about adult content, and parents that are watching, you know what we're talking about. We're not even talking about that, but things that may be too violent or whatever else. And I can think of no better example personally than Pan's Labyrinth. We've talked about it in a video before. It is a beautiful, sad, horrific, all kinds of things fairy tale for adults. It is, again, it is very violent, very, very violent. It's scary in parts.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely not remotely for kids. I think it's rated R even. But it is a really cool modern fairy tale. So
we hope you enjoyed today's video. We hope you got something out of it, because we sure did when we did all this research. Please like, comment, subscribe, click the little bell down there, ring the bell. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know if there's anything you'd like to see. We'd love to keep doing this kind of content. I think we are going to do several other ones like this. We got some other exciting things coming up. We're going to do probably after this. It may have been before this, but who knows. Just some drawing tutorials, both doing lots of art, and so
fantasy maps.
Yeah, doing some fantasy map stuff. Lots of stuff coming down the pike we're excited about. So thank you guys. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Phoenix fell. I can't speak anymore. As Goldilocks fell her flaming phoenix in the farting forest. Don't eat pickles, peanut butter, and sardines under the light of a full moon in bed on a winter. Under the light of a full moon in bed on an evening. Yeah, no, that's good.